Well, hey there. This is Kim Constable. It has been so long. In fact, it has been far too long. And I really do apologize that I have not recorded a podcast episode in, I want to say, over 18 months now. I really don't have any excuse. We all use the excuse that we have been busy. I have been extraordinarily busy, but that really does not excuse why I left you guys hanging. And I know that you have been asking constantly for more podcast episodes. And you know what? It's actually Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, sometime in August, I think August 5th, 2023. I was actually just sitting in the house and I've been working all morning on different programs that we're launching and ideas we come up with. And I said to my husband, I'm going to go to the office and record a podcast. And he looked at me in surprise. He was like, really? I was like, yeah, I've really felt inspired recently, like so many times, to come to the office or just to record a podcast. But I just never really seem to be able to make the time because my life is just extraordinarily busy. But I, recently just the business is going through so many changes and I've been going through so many changes, and we have so many people have come into the Sculpted Vegan Network who really actually have no clue who I am, believe it or not, which is kind of something that I did want to happen and something that I planned to happen. I had really planned that I was going to take a step back from the Sculpted Vegan and I was going to let Laura take over as the figurehead. And I was going to concentrate on building the new app that we've been building, which is called Only Fitness, which is launching later this year, which is what I've been doing. But there really feels like, or it really feels like, I have lost touch with the community. And I've just been seeing it more and more recently where I just feel like I've lost touch with you guys and I haven't been in the thick of it. And I just thought, you know what? I am going to get back to recording the podcast because I think it is super important that we continue to have a relationship, that I continue to teach and educate, which I know is what you guys want from me the most. And so that is what we're going to do. So welcome back to this first episode of the podcast in a long time. Now, a couple of things have happened since I last recorded the podcast. Not that they really affect you, but I now have a new microphone. So hopefully the sound is just as good as the old microphone. I now have a brand new office, which actually is brilliant because it's much quieter and I don't have a lot of echo and stuff, which I had in the other office. And what else has happened? I now have gotten back into horse riding. I wasn't horse riding whenever I was recording the podcast before, or maybe I had just gotten back into it. I'm not sure, but we now have 5 horses that we are competing professionally, my daughter and I. And so it's just been absolutely and utterly manic in my life. But one thing I do want to tell you just before we get into the content today is that I have always been keeping an eye on the groups. I'm always very present. I'm always very visible in the groups. I say visible, I'm always watching. I'm always there every single day inside the Facebook groups, seeing what's going on, noting what you guys are up to, and watching all the questions and comments. So I don't want you to ever think that I wasn't there watching. I wasn't there, behind you all the way. I always have been. I just haven't been quite as visible as I had been in recent years. But sure, you're absolutely not here to listen to me rambling on about what's been happening or not happening in my life. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I was sitting down thinking, right, what am I going to talk about? I could do all things bodybuilding. I could do all things business. Why, that was the other thing I was going to tell you guys. So this podcast, it started out as the Strong and Sculpted podcast because it was going to be all about bodybuilding. And then I kind of digressed into lots of different teaching. I always say that I just used bodybuilding as a platform for learning, as a springboard to talk about the more important lessons of life. And it's always my goal in these podcasts to create a perceptual shift for you guys. And by perceptual shift, I mean, I tell a lot of stories and then I bring in different points so that you can go through a journey of exploration of your own while you're listening to the podcasts, and then have like an aha moment at the end of the podcast and be like, oh my God. So, once you see the topic that I'm talking about, once you see it differently, you can never look at it in the same way again. And I think that's why, so many of you tell me that you love the podcast. I mean, we were up to like over 250,000 downloads a month whenever I had finished up recording. So it really was absolutely crazy for me to leave that amount of listener or that amount of attention on the table. But from now on, I guess this podcast isn't going to be exclusively about bodybuilding. I really have moved to a position or to an area in my life where I'm bringing in everything that's important to me. So I just started a new group called Coached by Kim, and people kept asking me, like, what is the group? It's a paid group. The first month is only $9.50. Like, it's nothing. And then it's $19 a month after that. And what I'm doing in Coach by Kim is I'm going live once a week, and it's inside a private Facebook group, and I'm literally just answering questions that have been asked from the week before. So we put up a graphic after the recording, and then people ask questions, and then I go through the graphic and I answer questions. And those questions are about business, bodybuilding, about mindset, about self-sabotage, about parenting, about everything. And I just weave all of my stories and all of my experience and all of my learning into the answers that I give, and people are absolutely loving it. If you want to find out more, you can check out the show notes, or you can go to the website. I'm not exactly sure of what the URL is, but it'll be somewhere on the Sculpted Vegan website. Coached by Kim is the name of the group, and you can absolutely join that. It's a cancel anytime program. There's no obligation to stay a member. But the reason why I started that is because I really feel that as a human being, I have evolved to a time in my life where it's not just about bodybuilding. Like, I'm 44 years of age. I'm, hurtling towards menopause. My mum was in full menopause by the time she was 45. My sister is 46. She's in full menopause. My other sister's 45. She's approaching full menopause. So, I'm hurtling towards full menopause. I now have, this company that I started in 2016, so it's 7 years old now, the company. My kids are all teenagers and growing up, my eldest is driving. So my life really has evolved to a place where I feel like I'm much more rounded, I guess. And so with this podcast, it's not just primarily going to be about bodybuilding moving forward. I'm going to try and record every single week again. It's going to be, I guess, a much more well-rounded podcast, if you like. Kim's Musings, if you like. I maybe call it Kim's Musings rather than the Kim Constable Podcast. But and as you know, I don't do a lot of interviews on the podcast, and this is for the honest to God's reason that I find many people quite boring. And I don't mean to be big-headed or narcissistic. I'm not saying that I'm not boring, but the reason why I record the podcast the way I do is that interviews are great, but you really just have to find a very, very interesting interviewee in order to put out a podcast, that is literally primarily interviews. And I know some people are super inspiring, and I have done a lot of interviews on the podcast, and I will continue to do interviews if it's someone who I find really inspiring. But I find that I prefer to teach, and I prefer to use life lessons in order to help you guys have perceptual shifts and be different in your life. So on that note, what we're going to talk about today is that nothing good ever happens inside your comfort zone. So I was asked recently to give a talk at a festival which was happening here in Belfast. And it was called Happy Fest. And I don't normally ever agree to talk at festivals or to give talks or anything like that, just simply because it's just not a good use of my time, is the honest to God's truth. And I normally, whenever I have some time off, just like to spend the time with my kids or my family, because I really just don't see enough of them as it is. But Kira, who runs Happy Fest, actually got me one day on Instagram. I've known her for years. She is a makeup artist here in Belfast, and she got me one day. I think I'd had a few drinks on Instagram, which is actually the best time for you to get me whenever I've been drinking, because I usually agree to everything. So I'd had a few drinks. I was feeling very magnanimous, and she was like, would you, think about coming to speak at Happy Fest? And I was like, 100%, always happy to support local businesses, which I am, and so she was like, that's amazing. What would you want your fee to be? And I said, no, I don't want any fee. I'll do it for free. It's no problem. So anyway, I went to speak at Happy Fest, and how I normally do things is I really don't plan things in advance, because the best way to teach is just to teach through the use of stories. So I just think about what's the overall message that I want to put out there, which is what I'm doing today with this podcast. What's the overall message that I want to put out there? What are the 3 main points that I want to make in this overall message? And then what stories can I attach to those overall points? So that's a really good tip for any of you guys who are ever speaking publicly, or if you're ever doing any kind of lives or anything like that, on your own online networks or for your own people. You always want to think, what's the overall message? You want to break it down into what are the 3 main points in the message, what stories go with those points, and then what's the conclusion. Because whenever you just teach by using facts and figures, people lose interest very, very, very quickly. Whereas whenever you teach using stories, you keep you keep them very, very engaged. So I decided at the time, whenever I went to speak at Happy Fest, that I would do this talk called Nothing Good Ever Happens Inside Your Comfort Zone. And the reason why I wanted to do this talk is because I had reached a kind of very difficult point in the business, and I'm still in the very difficult point in the business, in that we are basically in a very, very big pinch point with cash, because I've invested probably well over $1 million in developing Only Fitness, the new app that we're launching. It's not ready yet, but I was kind of making space in the business for it, and that I wasn't launching program after program after program, because I was making space for my time and my team's time for Only Fitness launching in September. But unfortunately, there's still a few bugs in the app. It's not ready to launch yet. And so I find myself in this position where it was like, oh shit, I have spent the last year actually making space in the business, not bringing on any other monthly recurring revenue products, not launching any big business products, not launching any big programs, apart from we did Extreme Body Makeover in March, which did a lot of revenue. Like, it did $1.3 million in gross revenue, with about $600,000 or £600,000 actually in pure profit. But we didn't launch anything in between those times, apart from the mindset program, because I thought that Only Fitness was launching in September. And so I was creating space for that. So anyway, I found myself, once I got back I was away on vacation with my family, and I got back and I realized, shit, we are in a bit of a pickle financially. Like, if I don't pull my finger out and get some stuff sorted in the business, then, you know, we are going to be in difficulties. And that, I guess that's part of the reason why I've come back here to do the podcast as well. Not because this podcast makes me any money. It doesn't at all. But I just feel like I'm reaching a new stage of growth in the business, and I really just wanted to connect with you guys again and bring you along on the journey. So anyway, I came back from vacation, and I had to do this talk the day after I got back from vacation. So I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought, what am I going to talk about? I thought, well, nothing good ever happens in your comfort zone, because that is something I always remind myself whenever I am in going through a difficult period. I just literally remind myself, nothing good ever happened inside my comfort zone. So it's time to get uncomfortable and embrace the discomfort and lean into the discomfort, because when you're in hell, the only way to get through it is just to keep on going. So I guess to talk about this, or to bring it all home, I'm going to start with a story, as I always do. You guys have missed my stories, haven't you? And I guess, like, if I go right back to the very beginning, I don't know if many of you know my story and how I got started. I suppose a lot of you do, but there may be a lot of new listeners to the podcast, especially if you've only just been introduced to the Sculpted Vegan this year. And way back in the beginning, you know, one of my most painful and uncomfortable times was whenever the kids were super, super young. And I guess what happened was I met my husband, Ryan, actually, and he wasn't obviously my husband at the time. He and I were introduced on a Tuesday, and I had started to run a business at the time. It was like an NLP business in Belfast, and a friend of ours, a mutual friend, had said, oh, I think I know someone who would be really interested in taking one of your courses. His name's Ryan Constable. He plays for Ulster Rugby. And I said, okay, great. You know, can you introduce me to him? So she took me to his house on a Tuesday night, and Ryan opened the door, and I never forget it. He was wearing the palest of pink t-shirts. It was so pale, it was almost white. And he had like these bulging arms, like bulging biceps. He was in such good shape because he had just retired from playing professional rugby. He was an athlete his whole life, and he was just so fucking sexy. He answered the door, and of course my eyes went out on stock. So I was like, hello. And I was like newly single, and definitely hormones flying. I was only 25 at the time. So anyway, Ryan, and he was newly single as well. So we had a great meeting on the Tuesday. He was definitely interested in what I was selling, probably more interested in me than what I was actually selling. And then on the Saturday, he invited me out for lunch. We went out for lunch, and then Tuesday we met for breakfast. Friday, he invited me to his house for dinner. Ching ching. And I never left. That was it. Friday night, I literally went for dinner, and I never, ever, ever spent another night at home. I was living at home with my mum at the time. I'd moved back home after coming back from England. And so Ryan and I got into this whirlwind relationship. And I found out that I was pregnant in April. So this was like 23rd of January we met, and I found out I was pregnant just after my birthday in April. My birthday's 14th of April. So I was already 7 weeks pregnant whenever I found out I was pregnant. My period, of course, had been like 3 weeks late, and I had just been convinced that I'd been traveling so much and working so much and building this company and late nights and all the rest of it, that I had completely denied the fact that I hadn't had a period. I was convinced that my period was just late because, you know, of all of these different things going on. And only when I did a pregnancy test, I realized I was 7 weeks pregnant. So it was like, hello, Ryan, who I've only met a very short time ago. Here is, I'm actually pregnant now. And so what are we going to do about this? I was going to say, hello, Ryan, here's our baby. But actually that's what he said to his parents. Whenever I finally went back to Australia to meet them, Corey was 8 months old, our first baby. And it was like, hi, here's my wife and here's our 8-month-old baby. Oh, sorry, not my wife, my girlfriend, because we didn't get married till we had 2 kids. But anyway, I digress. So I met Ryan very early on. I got pregnant very quickly. And then after Corey was born, I just loved being a mother so much. I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. Ryan and I were I gave up the company that I'd been building, and I realized how much I loved being a mom. And so Ryan and I had another baby very quickly afterwards. Kai was born only 17 months after Corey. So I got pregnant again very quickly. I was like totally ready for another one. And then I got pregnant again like very quickly afterwards, but unfortunately I had a miscarriage. But then I got pregnant again and Maya came along. She was 2.5 years after Kai, and then Jack came along only 18 months or just over 18 months. I think it was 20 months after Maya. So I found myself whenever, and I was not, by the way, Jack was a little accident. I definitely was not wanting another baby whenever she was only 13 months and I found out I was pregnant with Jack. And I had gone from, oh, this is so lovely, I love being a stay-at-home mom, it's so wonderful, to, oh my God, I am drowning in children. And I found out I was pregnant with Jack. I was absolutely and utterly horrified. Of course, now, I'm delighted that we have Jack. It's always the way. But at the time, I was just absolutely horrified. I was really not happy to be pregnant. And so then after Jack was born, I was very glad I wasn't going to have any more babies. And I was immediately sterilized actually after Jack was born, because I was like, ain't having any more babies. So I found myself with 4 children under the age of 5. Jack was born in October. Corey did not turn 6 until November. I had 4 children under 5 and 4 children under 6 then very quickly afterwards. And life was really, really, really tough. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying, I know there are people in the world with real problems. And I know there are people in the world who have 10 children, 12 children, fucking 20 children. I don't know. I know there are people out there with much greater problems than me. But their problems do not seem greater than mine, because my issues make my problems big for me. And so whenever the kids were young, I found it like really, really difficult emotionally, I guess. I don't think anyone ever warns you or sets you up for the fact that whenever you become a mother and your kids are really young, how difficult it is emotionally. It's exhausting. It's exhausting trying not to yell at your kids, trying to keep your state, trying to keep up with their demands, trying to get them all in the car. And I remember there was this one particular day that, I don't know why I had this vision of being like some kind of super mom or something. It wasn't even conscious, but definitely I tried to keep the house clean and make sure all the laundries were done. The laundry was done on time, and I cooked really delicious food every night. And honestly, Ryan was no fucking help at all. I mean none. He grew up in a family where, in South Africa he grew up, and then he moved to Australia when he was 12. So in his family, his father did nothing. His mum never worked. She was the one who always, looked after the kids. She baked a cake every single day. They never really had a lot of money growing up, but his mum was always there at home, and the dad did absolutely nothing. He just went out and worked all the time. So Ryan at the time was trying to build his company. He just retired from professional rugby. He'd started a rugby agency where he was representing rugby players as their agent. He was doing pretty well, but he had to take calls at all hours of the day and night. Like his players would have rung him for a chat about their bloody future rugby playing career at like 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve. That was the one that really took the biscuit for me. 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve, he got a phone call from one of his rugby players, and he took the bloody phone call and like talked this guy off the ledge about his career. But that's what it takes to build a business. I totally understand that now, but it didn't make it any easier for me, because I honestly just felt that I was drowning, absolutely drowning. And Ryan really gave me no help whatsoever when the kids were young. We have a completely different relationship now, but no help when the kids were young. And I found it really, really, really tough. And I was also very hard on myself. It wasn't even that Ryan was hard on me. He did have very high standards, of course, but I had very, very high standards for myself. And I remember this one particular day that For some reason, I used to take the kids to these tennis classes all the time. And, because it's very important for kids to go to tennis and do these little mini active classes and stuff at the local gym. And so there was this particular day, I remember I had gotten, Corey's coat and shoes on, and then I got him in the car, and I had to do it in stages, right? Anyone who's a lot of kids will understand this. You can't get them all out to the car at the one go. You have to, put the baby in the carry cot and set him on the ground. And then you get, the oldest one's coat and shoes on, and then you put him in the car, and then you get the next one's coat and shoes and you put him in the car. And then, you try to get them all with their coat and shoes on at the same time, but it never works. And then once you get one on, especially if they're toddlers, the other one then takes their coat or shoes off, and then they lose them somewhere, right? Or they spill something on themselves, and then you're like, put your bloody shoes on, keep your shoes on, don't take your shoes off, and you're out and in. And so I'd put one in the car, and then I come back and do the other one's shoes, and then that one got out of the car and came back in. I was like, no, go back to the car. And then the baby started crying, and I was trying to get Maya in the car, and it was just it was absolute and utter chaos. And at the time, I had been trying to earn some money running a business from home, running a language program for children, because I always wanted languages for my kids. And so I was actually, I had started this business before Jack was born. And then after Jack was born, I tried to continue with the business. And so I was trying to coordinate these language, speakers, these students, or these, language teachers that I had employed to not only come and work at my house with my kids, but also I was driving them here, there, and everywhere to go and to other people's houses so they could have languages for their kids. I was trying to coordinate all this, trying to look after the kids, trying to do the shopping, trying to do the cooking, trying to do the laundry, trying to keep the house clean, trying to look after my own sanity. And this particular day, I remember the kids just being absolutely chaotic. I was so stressed. I was so trying to get them out the door. And I remember I just fell to my knees and started to cry. I just literally broke. I absolutely broke in that moment. And I sank to my knees and I put my head in my hands and I started to sob. And I remember the kids coming over and being like, Mommy, are you okay? Are you okay? And they're like patting me on the back. And I was just crying and crying and crying and crying. And the baby started crying. And I was like, I can't even pick that baby up because I can't comfort another human whenever I'm so upset. And I was like, Jacob obviously was the baby. And I just remember crying and crying and crying. And I remember thinking, something has to give. Something has to give here, because I can't continue like this. I cannot go on like this. I'm done. And I think the thing that was hardest for me was that Ryan really did not give me any support. And it's not like I didn't ask for it. I did, but I wasn't the kind of person, and I am this kind of person now, but I wasn't the kind of person to say, oi, you get over here. I need you to do this, or you need to be home to do this. I wasn't the kind to demand someone's support if they're not willingly going to give it. I'm just not that person. I'm definitely better now, but I wasn't that way at the time. And so I just felt like I was exhausted. I was breastfeeding. I was, wasn't getting very much sleep at the time. I was overworked. It was just horrendous. And I just broke that particular day. But the great thing about it was I had a realization in that moment. Of course, I can look back on this hard time now and say, I'm so glad that it happened, because I realized in that moment as I was on my knees in the hall that no one was coming to save me. And I mean, no one was coming to save me. I think up until that moment, I had always hoped or thought that at some point Ryan would have like a realization, or his company would, make loads of money, and I could afford a nanny and a housekeeper and, really nice vacations. And really all I wanted as a young mother was a break. In fact, I didn't even want a break. I just wanted freedom. I think that's why people start businesses. I think that's what they crave whenever they see people with successful businesses or people with a lot of money. It's certainly what people say when they see me running my business. They say, what I represent is freedom. I can go and ride my horses. I can go on vacation. I can go to work when I want to. Of course, they don't see the back-breaking work, the hard side of it. They don't see any of that. They only see the freedom. But definitely for me at the time, all I actually ever wanted was to be free. And that is why I'd become a stay-at-home mum in the first place, because I wanted to get out of the grind of working 9 to 5 or building my own company and all that. And I thought that whenever I became a stay-at-home mum and I didn't have to worry about the bills or where the money was coming from or anything like that, I really did think that I would be like a yummy mummy having coffee every day. And I thought that represented freedom. And then once I had it, I realized it did not represent freedom at all. It was like I was trapped in a prison. Now, I'm making this sound horrendous. I was a stay-at-home mum to my 4 beautiful children, but it was really, really, really difficult. But the biggest thing, like I said, I realized at that moment was no one was coming to save me. The only way that I was going to have everything I wanted was if I worked for it myself. I just was like, I can't do this anymore. And so what I did was I gave up my language business. I was like, this is not sustainable. Absolutely not sustainable with my lifestyle, with the kids or whatever. I gave up the language business and I decided to write an ebook. That's what I decided I was going to do. The internet wasn't new then. It had been out since I was in school, but the world of online businesses was pretty new. And I remember hearing about ebooks and different things. And I remember thinking, right, okay, if I write an ebook, I've heard that if you write ebooks, you can sell the ebooks online and then you can make money from them. So if I just write an ebook, I can make some money online and then I can start, my being financially free. And then when I'm financially free, I can make whatever decisions I want. And so I started researching online businesses. I started researching ebooks and writing ebooks. And as I started to dive into the world of online marketing, I realized that there was so much more to it. There wasn't just ebooks. There was ebooks and upselling and websites and blogs. And there were people who were really crushing it online and making money selling digital courses and online memberships. And I just went down an absolute rabbit hole. I went down a rabbit hole of researching online businesses, and I decided that this was what I was going to do. And I never looked to Ryan to provide for me ever again. Now, when I say that, of course, he was still paying the bills, but I had this realization. I think I was always holding out for the day when Ryan's company would make a lot of money, and I, as his wife, I would be entitled to some of that money or to use that money for my, what I wanted to use the money for. And that's just the way it would be because we were married. But the thing about Ryan and I was we had very, very different values when it came to money. Ryan was a saver. I was a spender. I liked traveling first class and the luxuries in life, whereas Ryan will stay in a second-rate hotel and travel economy class because he doesn't believe that business class is worth it. He values saving money so much more than he values comfort. Whereas at the time, I valued comfort much more than I valued saving money. Now I think I have a good balance of both. And so I decided that I was going to make it on my own, and I started to work. I looked at my day and I completely restructured it. I bought a book called Time Management for Manic Mums by a girl called Alison someone. Can't remember what it is, but if you look it up on Amazon, you should read it. It will change your life. Thank you, Alison, for writing the book. Time Management for Manic Mums. I read the book and I implemented all of the time management strategies into my life, and it completely transformed my life. And I realized that if I was going to start working on my online business and I was going to start growing this online business, I was going to have to carve out some time for it. But I had no nannies, I had no childcare, I had no help at all. And so the only time that I had to work child-free was before they woke up in the morning or after they went to bed at night. But Jack was super young and he was still breastfeeding during the night and as his last feed of the night. And so I started getting up between 4 and 5 a.m. Eventually it became 4 a.m. But in the beginning, I was so knackered from having been up most of the night that I probably didn't get up till about 5. And I carved myself 2 hours between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. Then eventually became 3 hours between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. And I did this Monday to Friday. And I got up and I worked those times. And sometimes it was just researching the web. Sometimes it was just going down a rabbit hole of learning. Sometimes it was watching masterclasses or webinars, and I learned about Pinterest. I learned about Facebook. I learned about Facebook marketing. I learned about email marketing, building websites. I mean, I learned every single possible thing that I could about online marketing. And this is the thing about me. People think that I was very successful very quickly, but what they don't realize is I actually started in 2011, and that was 12 years ago. So I started in the online world. I wasn't successful until 2017, but I started in the online world in 2011. And I listened to podcasts while I ironed, and I hung up laundry at 11 p.m. and I listened to online, webinars and seminars when I was hanging up laundry. Like any time when I was doing something idle, like ironing or laundry or walking, with the baby or walking the dog or whatever, as much as I could, I absorbed and listened as much as I could. And so, and what happened was, eventually, whenever I found the idea for the Sculpted Vegan in 2016, that's when it all kind of changed for me. And I won't even go into the story of that because it's not relevant, but I made $1 million in the first year, 1.2 million in the first year. I did 2.4 million in the second year. I did over 4 million in the third year, and we've done over 25 million in online sales since then. But what happened was my first point before I move on is that if I hadn't have been as uncomfortable as I was when the kids were really, really young, I would never, ever have decided to start my own business. Had Ryan, given me everything that I wanted, had he, said, oh, you can use as much money as you want. Oh, yes, we can fly first class, or, oh, that's totally fine, darling. Like if he had been the kind of person to like not look at the bills, or say he was a multi-millionaire, right, at the time, and money was no object, I would have been too comfortable to actually get out there and start a business on my own. It was the discomfort of my situation which caused me to change. And one of the things I always preach is that comfort is the enemy of all progress, and comfort is the enemy of change. Whenever we are comfortable, then we don't change. It's whenever we get uncomfortable that we change. And again, if you've heard me teach, you will hear me say a lot that the only time that human beings change is when change becomes easier than staying the same, which basically means you have to be super uncomfortable where you are now to motivate yourself to change. And only when you're more uncomfortable than you are comfortable will you change. So it's very important to never fear being uncomfortable, because when you're uncomfortable, it forces you into looking at different options. There's a great quote by Winston Churchill, and I think he says, never waste a good crisis, or something like that. And I really love that quote, because anytime I'm in crisis now, or anytime the business is in crisis, or I'm in crisis personally, I always think, oh, well, isn't this going to be just an absolutely fantastic opportunity for growth and for learning? And it always, always, always is. So I've completely learned to reframe uncomfortable times in my life. But of course, what happened was after the first year and after the second year, the business was doing really well and it was trundling along, and I was replicating the things that worked. We were doing launches and we were doing webinars and we were doing all of these different things in the business, and the business was turning over money and it was growing, and I was bringing on more staff, and like I said, we did 2.4 million in our second year. And I started to get a little bit complacent. And I remember in 2018, we went to Australia for Christmas, and we had planned to launch a 4-week shred in January. And so we went to Australia for Christmas. It was a wildly expensive trip. We flew the whole family first class. We stayed in a beautiful big beach house. I think the trip cost us £75,000, cost us just shy of $100,000. That was the level of expense that I was spending at the time. But the company could afford, I could afford it. I had made the money to spend, so it wasn't an issue. But I'd always reinvested a lot of money that I'd made back into the company, certainly into staff. And then in Christmas 2019, we went to Australia. And then, of course, in January 2020, we were still in Australia, but we were coming home, and we started to hear, reports of, what was happening in China. And of course, then it turned out to be COVID, but, nobody really thought that it was actually going to come to Europe. We were like, oh, it's terrible what's happening in China, but, it won't really hit us. And then we started to hear about it happening, the lockdowns in Spain and Italy and whatever. And we were like, oh, yeah, but the UK is never going to lock anyone down, UK and Ireland. Like, it's absolutely not going to happen. Not over here. We're a democracy, for God's sake. They're not going to lock us down. That's completely ridiculous. And so I just continued on and ignored the data as if, life was grand. And we had this, amazing big launch planned of the Sculpt and Shred program, a reopening of the Sculpt and Shred program in March. And I invested £100,000 on Facebook ads. £100,000 on Facebook ads. And here's how it works whenever you run do this kind of sales strategy, which is a webinar and then you sell something at the end. So what you do is you advertise your free masterclass or your free webinar, and people sign up for that. So that's your upfront cost in ads. People sign up for the free masterclass, then they watch the masterclass or watch the recording, and then you sell them something at the end. And what I was selling at the end was my Sculpt and Shred program, which was $1,500 at the time. And so this is what I had planned for March. I had invested 100 grand in ads. We had signed up a massive amount of people for the masterclasses. I want to say like 20,000 people for the masterclasses. We should have sold, you usually sell 2% of registrations. And actually, if I pick up my trusty calculator here, I'm going to tell you how much we should have made. I think we had sold, we signed up 20,000 people, multiplied by 0.02. We should have sold 400 programs, multiplied by $1,500. We should have made about $600,000 in profit. So I should have, been absolutely 100% to pay off that 100,000 that I had on the credit card. And we'd done loads of these launches before, so we had loads of data on them. So of course, I'm sitting there, first night of my first masterclass. I have like 8,000 people registered for it. I go live and I start to look at all the numbers coming up in the masterclass, and I realize that there's nobody joining. Or the numbers go up to like 14, 15, 16, and then maybe to 80, then maybe to 100. Now, normally when you have about 8,000 people registered for a masterclass, you should have about 20% of people show up, which means out of 8,000, I should have had about 1,600 people showing up live. And I think in the end, I had about 120. And I was like, what is going on? Where are all these people? But the show had to go on. I still presented the masterclass. And at the end of the masterclass, normally what happens is you start, people will always purchase live on the masterclass, and you shout out their names as they purchase live, and the purchases come in. And then after you finish the masterclass, more purchases come in. And at the end of the masterclass, there were no purchases. And I was like, holy shit, what is going on? Like, it was so weird to me. It was like I was in some kind of alternate universe. And then I went next door. I went to get some dinner. We decided to do these ones quite late at night to appeal to the American market. So I went across the road to the Indian across the road to get some dinner. And the place was absolutely deserted. I remember saying to the guys there, like, I was in the office, I was like, what is going on? They were like, oh, we don't know. Like this COVID thing is coming. Like it's everyone, like there's no one here tonight. Our restaurant is empty. They were all, worried as well. And anyway, I went back, I did my second masterclass. And then the next day I realized that the shit had hit the fan. COVID had hit Northern Ireland. Everyone was panic buying toilet roll. What the hell was that all about? Everyone was in the supermarkets, panic buying everything. Mass panic had ensued. And it was like, what did they think was going to happen? Did they think they were going to close the bloody supermarkets? Like, the whole thing is so ridiculous. Whenever you look back on it, I never bought into the panic of COVID ever, because I'm just not that kind of person. No judgment, by the way, if you are. I totally get it. Like, the media sell fear. Like, it's their most delicious thing to sell. But anyway, so this all happened right in the middle of my launch. I realized after the first day, we made no sales that night, or one or two maybe, and like one or two sales of a $1,500 program is not going to clear my 100,000 bill. And I realized that I had to do something, and I had to do something fast. So I completely pivoted in the business. Anyway, we pivoted quickly. We added a home program component to it. We still went ahead and launched. I was like, I can't pull out of it now. We actually ended up making, I think, about $250,000 in gross profit. We were expecting to make about 600,000. So I was able to clear my Amex bill, even though I thought that I wouldn't. And I just really pulled out all the stops and went ahead and, and with the launch, very few hard days in between the different webinars, trying to figure out what to do. But then after the launch was over, I realized that my business was in serious diffs, because I hadn't taken my eye off the ball, but I had banked a lot. I'd become complacent, if I'm honest. I'd banked a lot on this new webinar that I was running in March, making an absolute fortune. And it just didn't happen. And so I was able to pay off my credit card bill, but it left very, very little money in the company to run the company. And we had no other launches planned. I think we had a couple of different launches planned, but we had to completely change them because gyms were now closed. And our whole business was predicated on the fact that people had to go to a gym, and gyms all over the world were closed. People couldn't go and train in the gym. We didn't have any home programs at all. And so I was like, and of course everyone was in this state of fear. No one knew what was going to happen. People were being sent home from work. People were wondering, are we still going to get paid? How are the businesses going to survive? Like, what's going to happen? We were all in this absolute state of not knowing what was going to happen. I was like, who the hell is going to purchase like a fucking gym program at this time when we're in this stage of really not knowing what's happening? So what then happened was, I went home after my launch. I I just didn't know what to do. I had these staff that I had to pay. I didn't have the size of the staff that I have now. At the minute, my wage bill is about £90,000 a month. It's like it's about $110,000, $120,000 a month. $120,000 a month. My wage bill is $120,000 a month. Like, it's insane. It wasn't as big then, but it was getting to the stage where it was pretty big. And I was thinking, how am I going to pay these people? How am I going to pay these people who work for me? But who am I going to let go? Because I need everybody. Like, I need Jamie, and I need Vanessa, and I need Mark, and I need Alan, and I can't, I can't decide between them. It's insane. And so every night I would go home and I would drink. I would go home from work. I would stay late in the office. And every time I walked down my office stairs, I'm not in that office anymore. I've moved to a much bigger building now. But every time I went down the office stairs in years afterwards and it was late at night, it always reminded me of leaving during COVID, when it was one of the most desperate and despairing and dark times of my life, because I had people dependent on me for their livelihoods. And there's a massive responsibility that comes with people working for you and being dependent on you for their livelihoods. And because you're not just affecting yourself anymore in your own family, you're affecting other people's lives. And I remember leaving every night, and I would go home at about 8 o'clock, and Ryan would pour me a drink, and I would just get drunk. I would get drunk to numb the pain. No, not completely, I'm already smashed, but I would drink like half a bottle of champagne, or I would drink sink 3 or 4 beers, or drink enough that I could just numb the pain. I could just numb myself from what I was going to do, because I really had no answers. Like, I was grappling around, and I was doing different podcasts and releasing different, and asking the communities and trying to dig into what it was people wanted and how were they feeling, and, how fearful were they and how could I help? But I was also trying to figure out how is my business going to survive? And so I remember this particular night I went home, and that day had been Ryan had come to the office that day to help me, because I was looking at all the staff costs. I was trying to figure out who I was going to let go. I looked at my list of staff, and I was like, okay, I can maybe do without that person, but I can't do without that person, but I really can't do without that person. And I was like, how can I call this person and say to them, I'm sorry, you no longer have a job? Because it's not like they can go and get another job somewhere else, because there are no jobs, because everyone's been sent home from COVID. So it was one of the most painful times of my life. And this particular night I went home and I got drunk, and I went upstairs to bed, and I got into bed and I passed out. Of course, as you do. But then, of course, what happens whenever the alcohol leaves your system at about 2 o'clock in the morning is you wake up. And so I went home, or I woke up at 2 o'clock, and of course I was like, shit, I'm awake. And I tried to go back to sleep, but of course, as soon as I was awake, bing, my brain started going crazy, and I just decided to get up. I was like, I'll just get up and I'll go downstairs for a while. And so I lifted my computer and I snuck out of the room, and I went down to the living room, and the fire was still lit. So I threw some logs on it to, G it up again. And I sat on the sofa with my computer, and I went through every single expense in the business, every single outgoing that I had. I looked at all of the salaries. I looked at all of the incomings. I looked at the money we had in the bank. I just looked at everything. I got the data, because whenever you get the data, fear is just a lack of data. And so whenever you get data, it always makes you feel better. So I looked at all of the numbers. It wasn't pretty. I looked at, how long we could survive with the money we had coming in. And I looked at all of that. And then once I had that sorted, I thought, okay, well, I feel better for knowing now. And then I decided, I was sitting there and a weird thing happened. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I thought, you know what? There's always opportunity in a crisis. There's always opportunity in a crisis. In every single crisis across the world, there are people who thrive. Like, whenever we go to war, there are people who make a lot of money because they maybe make the things that we need to go to war, or the things that the army needs, or that the relief people need, or whatever. So even though war is a decimating time for many people, it's actually a time when other people will thrive. And of course, during COVID, people were starting to thrive. Masks and stuff hadn't come in at that point, but, people were starting to bring in all the PPE equipment and all of the, the Perspex screens, all that kind of stuff. So these people were thriving. And I remember just sitting there thinking, there's always opportunity in a crisis. Where is the opportunity? And I thought, I'm not going to focus on the negative. I'm going to focus on the positive. And so I started Googling good things that have come out of COVID. What good things have come as a result of COVID. And so it started showing me that, the smog had lifted over China for the first time in hundreds of years, and dolphins were starting to, swim through the rivers in Venice. And, all of these, and how the earth had cleared and whatever. And there was a lot of people who had these hypotheses that COVID came in order to give the earth a chance to heal because human beings stopped decimating it. And they all, retreated inside. And so there were loads of different, I just started looking at all of these different things that were positive from COVID. Rather than dwelling on the negative, I started to really, really focus on the positive. And I had this like full body shift, I guess, is the only way you can describe it. I remember sitting on the couch, the fire was lit. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning at this point. And after focusing on all these positive things and realizing there was opportunity in a crisis, I suddenly had this feeling that everything was going to be okay. And it was going to be okay because I was going to make it okay. And I said to myself, in that moment, I am not letting anyone go. I'm not letting anyone go. No one in my company is losing their job. And not only are they not going to lose their job, but I am going to be one of the people that during this worldwide pandemic that thrives. I'm going to be one of the survivors during this pandemic. And I'm going to be one of the beacons of light in amongst all the despair. And I had like this feeling that came over me, this feeling of relief. I don't know what you would call it. And once I'd made that resolution, I closed the computer and I went upstairs. I got into bed. I fell into a deep sleep and I slept until the morning. And I woke up in the morning and I told Ryan what had happened last night. And I said, I'm not letting anyone go. And he said, well, good for you. I said, we are going to make this happen. And so what happened then was I started focusing on how are people feeling? What is it that they want right now? I was like, well, they're scared. They don't know where, their income's coming from. They don't have a lot of money to spend on food. They can't get a lot of the ingredients, real complicated ingredients, whatever that, they would need for our meal plans. And I was like, well, they can't go to gyms. They can only train from home. But most people don't have gyms at home or don't have equipment at home. So they're struggling to know what to do. And I started really focusing on what it was people wanted. And I remember then we built a gym in our house. And I remember training in the gym one day and suddenly this idea started to come to me when I was training. And I was like, it's like people are in jail, it's like they're being forced to stay in their houses. And it's, it feels like prison in a way. And then I started to think, well, what if I created a workout? What if I created a home program, which gives people what they want? It gives them a workout that can be done at home with zero equipment. I'll give them, money, the opportunity to win money at the minute, which loads of people want because they're struggling with money. I'll give them a really super simple meal plan and I'll put the focus on it. I'll make it like a jailhouse, something, which really resonates with how they're feeling right now. And so the idea for the jailhouse shred was born. And the jailhouse shred, we launched it in April 2020. We went from idea to launch in 2 weeks, and you've no idea how difficult that is. That means the PDF was written, the Facebook's ads were recorded, the trainings were recorded for, the home program. We had to record all the exercise videos. We had to do all the Facebook ads. We had to do the campaigns. We had to design all the Facebook ads. We had to do all the checkouts, everything. Design from idea to launch in 2 weeks. And that is a phenomenal amount of work in a really short space of time. We launched the Jailhouse Shred, and the Jailhouse Shred made $230,000 in 2 weeks. And I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely and utterly stunned. But I mean, literally, the Jailhouse Shred had only launched and I was already thinking of the next program that I was going to launch. And in 2020, we ended up launching 11 programs in 12 months. 11 programs in 12 months. We did the 4-week shred in January. We did the Sculpt and Shred in March. We did the Jailhouse Shred in April. We did Butt Camp. We did Butt Camp in June. We did Basement Jacked in July. We did $1 Million Mentor in August. We did Sculpt and Shred again in September. Then we also did the Holiday Shred. We launched the Ultimate Vegan Kitchen And I think there was one more in there. I can't even remember. I wasn't counting. But we reached the end of the year completely exhausted, but we doubled our turnover. So we went from 2.4 million the year before to 4.5 million in the COVID year. And it was amazing. It was absolutely and utterly amazing. So, I mean, what is the point in what I'm telling you here is that I'm so thankful, so thankful for that really hard time, because it forced me to be better than I was. Because nobody is motivated from a place of comfort. Not even me. Not even the almighty Kim Constable is motivated from a place of comfort. I had sunk into a place of comfort after COVID, after being in Australia, after, really pushing hard to grow the business for a long time. I had sunk into a place of comfort. And it was COVID that gave me a kick up the ass to get going again and really build something big. And now every time I hit a hard time in the business, I lean into the discomfort. In fact, anytime I had a hard time anywhere in my relationships, in my family, in the business, I lean into the discomfort. In fact, I actually embrace it because I know it's going to force me to grow and be better. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that I actually seek discomfort now because I know that the growth that happens from it is absolutely and utterly magical. And it's just like, you just have to be willing to do whatever it takes. But you also have to not panic whenever you hit a hard time. And even if it's a self-imposed hard time, like you might be doing the Extreme Body Makeover program at the minute and you're right in the middle of the 12-week shred and you're exhausted and you're hungry and it's hard. But you know what? You could stop. You could stop tomorrow. Like my husband used to say it to me when I used to complain when I was prepping for the shows. He used to go, well, just don't do it. And I used to be like, oh yeah, thanks Ryan, fuck you. And he'd be like, no, seriously, Kim, just stop. If it's that hard, don't do it. And that really, even though I hated him for saying it, it really gave me a perspective. I was like, well, yeah, I'm choosing this. I could just stop. So what am I complaining about? Like, really, what am I complaining about? And so you have to, but that isn't really the point that I'm making, because those are hard times that you've chosen for yourself. And yes, we do need to choose things that are hard for ourselves. We need to place ourselves in positions of adversity, because adversity is how we grow as human beings. But the lesson that I really want you to learn today is that whenever you find yourself in crisis, the next time you find yourself in crisis, you have to remind yourself of what I'm telling you here. Never waste a good crisis. There's always opportunity in a crisis if you're just willing to look for it. And there's two types of people in this world. There's people who collapse in a crisis, and there's people who grab a crisis by the horns and tackle the motherfucking shit out of it. And that's the kind of person that I am. I will literally lean into a crisis and I will do everything within my power to get myself out of it. And if you know you're that kind of person, then you really don't need to panic. And I know that's easy enough for me to say. And whenever I'm going through a really hard time, and I am going through a really hard time at the minute with growing Only Fitness and pushing hard in the business and trying to keep all the balls in the air. And I do have some sleepless nights, and I have times when I doubt myself, and I have times when I feel sad and I feel upset, and I wonder, am I going to be able to do it? And then there's times when I'm sitting here recording this podcast and talking to you guys, and I go, this is what I do. This is who I am. It's totally fine. It's going to be fine. Even if the business went under, even if it went bankrupt, we'd be fine, because human beings survive. Not that it's going to go bankrupt, but, I always just remind myself that, my track record for getting through hard days right up until now has been 100%. 100% of times I've gotten through hard days, and 100% of the time I have gotten through a crisis. But more than anything, it's not just about surviving a crisis. It's about really pushing yourself to understand that there's opportunity in a crisis if you're just willing to look for it, and that nothing good ever happened in your comfort zone, and that anytime you hit something that is uncomfortable, you genuinely should just lean into it and allow yourself to learn the lessons that you need to learn, because I do believe that everything in this life works out exactly as it should be. And now what I've realized is that every time I'm in this position, it's exactly where I need to be. And it's not that I'm not really big into, the universe, and your path and your angels and all that at all. But if I do look back on all the times when I thought I couldn't get through it, or it was hard, or it shouldn't have, happened that way, I realize that yes, it was hard at the time, but it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. So now every time I go through something really, really hard, I just tell myself, well, this is going to be one of my stories. I'm going to go on the podcast, or I'm going to stand on stage, or I'm going to tell this at a dinner party. And this is going to be one of my success stories, which is going to inspire other people. And so just to finish, I guess, there was something that happened recently, which was quite lovely. I took my staff out for the Belfast staff anyway. Unfortunately, we have a worldwide staff, so the worldwide ones can't always come out on these team building lunches that we do. But we went out on a team building lunch, which turned into an all-day drinking session. And so the last women standing were me and Laura, head trainer Laura, and also my beautiful PA, Natalie, who's going to head up Only Fitness whenever it launches. And we were having dinner in the Merchant Hotel. And I remember Laura, I was talking about, the business, going through hard times and stuff. And I remember Laura said something to me, which I'll never forget. She said, do you know what, Kim? She said, I never, ever worry about, my jobs. I said, I don't want you guys to worry about your jobs or anything. It's just, we're having a cash flow issue, but it'll all be fine. She said, Kim, I never worry about my job. And I said, really? Why? And she said, because I know that you will do whatever it takes. And I was like, you know what, Laura, you're right. I will do whatever it takes. And she said, you will do whatever it takes. And so I never worry about that. She said, all I want to do is support you in any way I can while you do whatever it takes. So whenever you need me, I'm there. And she really is she is like my right-hand woman. She is absolutely phenomenal. We all love Laura, but Laura has grown more in the last year, I would say, than anyone I've ever known in my entire life. She is absolutely an amazing woman, and I'm so proud of her. But she just said to me, you will do whatever it takes. And I am willing to lose it all, but I know that I won't lose it all because I am willing to do whatever it takes, because I lean into pain and discomfort, and pain is one of the best motivators you can ever have. So you should not spend your life avoiding pain. You should spend your life seeking pain and taking risks, because when you take risks and those risks don't pay off, which sometimes they don't, you are forced to look for other options which are outside of your comfort zone. And that is where the magic lies. So the question I leave you to ask yourself is, how uncomfortable are you willing to be? Because your success in life is determined by the amount of difficult conversations and difficult situations you are willing to have and you're willing to put yourself in. I always say that to my kids. I always say your success in life is determined by the amount of difficult conversations you're willing to have, but it also goes further into the amount of difficult situations you're willing to put yourself in. So what I want to encourage you all is to dream big and take risks, because nothing good ever happened inside your comfort zone. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode back to the podcast, but here is what I want from you now. I want you to write into support@thesculptedvegan. We're going to send out an email with the podcast. I want you to write into support. I want you to respond to that email. Just hit reply. And I want you to tell me, what do you want me to talk about on the podcast? Ask me a question. Give me a general situation that you're in. Just tell me what you want, because I want to record the stuff that you guys want to hear, and I want to help you to solve your problems, because ultimately that is what I am. I am a problem solver. It is my greatest pleasure in life to help people solve their problems. So whatever problems I can help you solve, I want you to hit reply to the podcast email, write back to customer support. I want you to tell them, they're going to tell me, or I want you to write to me on Instagram. And I want you to tell me on Instagram. And I think we'll probably bring back the podcast giveaway as well. So what we used to do was every single month, we used to choose someone who left a review on the podcast, on iTunes, mostly it was, or on Spotify. They used to send me a picture of their review on Instagram, and we used to choose one person to win any Sculpted Vegan program per month. So let's bring that back. Leave a review of the podcast, send me a review. You can leave one every single week if you want. Send me a picture of the review, and I will enter you into a draw to win any Sculpted Vegan program of your choice just by leaving a review. It also helps to push the podcast up the ratings on iTunes and Spotify. Actually, I don't think you can leave a review on Spotify. I think it's only on iTunes or maybe on Podbean. But anyway, do it. Send me a picture of it. And I promise you, I will enter you into the draw to win the free program. Okay, guys, this was absolutely amazing. I feel like I'm back in my happy place. Even though I can only hear my own voice, I can't actually see or hear you guys. I know you're listening. I imagine you on the treadmill. I imagine you walking your dog. I imagine you cooking and listening to this and me talking in your ear. And it brings me so much joy. You have no idea. And I've missed you all so much. And I hope you've missed me too. But I promise I'm going to be back every week now with the podcast and making a commitment. And I can't wait to get your feedback on this one because you're all going to be so surprised whenever it comes out. But all that is left is for me to say thank you so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. I love you all so much. And I will speak to you next week on another episode of the Kim Constable Podcast. Bye for now.